Hello.
Prepare yourselves for 5 additional spine-chilling true horror narratives. Before we commence, kindly indicate your listening location and the current time in the comments section. Remember to subscribe and leave a like. Your support is appreciated in advance. Now, without further delay, extinguish the lights, don your headphones, and let us plunge directly into the terror. Story 1. Some locales are simply not intended for human habitation. That is the foremost lesson one learns when laboring in Alaska's Arctic petroleum extraction zones or any region situated that far north. You must exhibit deference to the terrain, or it will utterly consume you. I was a member of a compact team conducting assessments on a secluded drilling installation located 60 miles to the west of Frostbite Ridge, Alaska. It was the type of isolated expanse where one would encounter no other living being for days on end. Merely mile after mile of desolate tundra, treacherous black ice, and a wind that shrieked like a creature in its final throes. It was the advent of January. The sun had entirely vanished, leaving only perpetual darkness. We had just concluded a week-long assignment and were navigating our return to the primary encampment in a 2-truck convoy. Progress was sluggish, capped at 25 miles per hour on the icy roadways. A single misstep meant certain demise, awaiting discovery only with the arrival of spring. We were approximately halfway across the ice road when our headlights illuminated an anomalous sight. Something proceeding directly down the middle of the thoroughfare. It was a man, solitary without a proper coat, clad only in a thin hooded garment, denim trousers, and athletic footwear. The temperature hovered at a brutal 20 degrees below zero. No individual could long endure existence in such conditions without appropriate attire. Absolutely no one. "What the?" my comrade Cole murmured from the passenger compartment. I decelerated the heavy vehicle, and the secondary truck following us mirrored our action. The figure evinced no reaction whatsoever. He neither gestured, flinched, nor even looked up, merely continuing his forward trajectory. Cole lowered his window as we positioned our truck alongside him. "Hey, are you all right, man?" he inquired, but received no reply. The man's countenance was utterly devoid of expression. His blank eyes appeared cracked and raw from the relentless chill, and his skin was eerily pallid, resembling that of a lifeless cadaver. I sensed a profound unease creeping up my spine. This was profoundly amiss. One of the individuals in the rear compartment muttered, "Perhaps he's in shock. Maybe his snowmobile experienced a malfunction." I compelled myself to articulate, "Hey, do you require transportation? You'll succumb to the cold out here." Still, utter silence. Cole wavered momentarily, then extended his arm to attempt to rouse the man by shaking his shoulder. It was at that precise moment that the figure moved with startling velocity. His head snapped sharply in our direction, his gaze locking onto Cole with the intensity of a predator. Then he lunged. Cole barely managed to withdraw his arm in the nick of time before the man's digits clamped down upon the exposed window frame. His fingernails were an unsettling black, and his fingertips were fractured and bloodied. He displayed a ghastly, wide, and unnaturally distended grin. Then he emitted a scream. It was not a mere shout nor a plea for assistance, but a sound permeated with pure, unadulterated fury. It was an unearthly shriek that tore through the frigid air and plunged every instinct within my being into an escalating state of panic. I forcibly depressed the accelerator pedal. The truck momentarily fishtailed on the ice before the tires finally achieved adequate traction, lurching forward. And that entity, that purported man, remained tenaciously clinging to the window frame, pacing us stride for stride, running alongside our vehicle. He was running at an astonishing 25 miles per hour, and his grip, Jesus Christ, his grip was unyielding. Cole was now screaming, desperately attempting to dislodge the individual while the rest of us observed in profound horror as this seemingly frozen maniac maintained pace with the damned truck. Finally, Cole delivered a forceful kick to his arm. The man's fingers bent backward in a manner utterly impossible for human digits, and he finally released his hold. He tumbled, rolling across the ice, and then vanished into the encroaching darkness behind us. No one uttered a sound. No one even drew a breath. I continued to drive, and no one dared to cast a glance backward. 30 miles stretched before us to the next outpost, Sentinel. 30 miles of absolute quietude save for one persistent sensation. The lingering echo of that piercing scream within my mind, and the dreadful sinking conviction that we had not witnessed the last of him. We remained silent, not for the ensuing 5 miles, nor for 10. The cabin of the truck was utterly still, punctuated only by our ragged, uneven breathing, the kind of respiration one experiences when the body has yet to reconcile itself with the full impact of profound terror. Cole was still clutching his arm where that entity had seized him. His sleeve was pushed back, revealing a perfectly formed bruise resembling a handprint, dark, grotesque, and already beginning to swell. I maintained my gaze fixed on the road, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. Behind us, the headlights of the second truck pierced through the profound blackness. I derived a degree of solace from that, knowing we were not entirely isolated. But then Cole whispered, "He's still out there." I glanced at him. What? He was intently gazing into the side mirror. His breathing had become shallow. I felt my stomach clench with apprehension. I checked my own mirror. Nothing but the infinite black void of the tundra. Then I seized the radio. "Hey, do you guys perceive anything behind us?" My voice emerged excessively strained, too forced. A brief pause followed by static crackling, then Murphy's voice from the second truck. "Negative. Nothing but ice and your taillights." Cole remained fixed in his stare. "Cole," I stated more sharply this time, "what do you perceive?" Slowly he rotated to face me. His expression was disturbing, as if he were striving to comprehend something his intellect refused to process. Then he whispered, He's running behind us." A jolt of unadulterated terror surged through me. I abruptly turned my head to the mirror once more. Nothing, merely miles upon miles of desolate road extending into the black. "Cole, I don't see—" "He's there!" Cole abruptly shouted, seizing my arm. "He's running directly behind us. I swear to God, man, he's right there." His voice trembled. His pupils were grotesquely dilated, yet there was absolutely nothing discernible there. Nothing but ice and the distant headlights in the vast, unending darkness. Then the radio crackled. Murphy's voice cut through, low and shaken. "Okay. We see him now." My blood ran instantly cold. Murphy was not one to engage in levity. "How far back?" I forced out. Another pause, then 10 feet. I nearly swerved off the thoroughfare. 10 feet. No living being could sustain that pace with a truck at this velocity. Not in this remote expanse, not in this biting cold. Not a human. "Speed up," Murphy commanded, his voice now taut with profound dread. I ceased all deliberation. I simply slammed the accelerator. The engine roared to life. Ice crunched beneath the tires as the speedometer ascended past 30, then 35, then 40 miles per hour. Still, Murphy's voice persisted through the radio, flat, hollow, and disbelieving. "He's keeping up." My entire corporeal form became rigid. No way. I longed to witness it. I simultaneously recoiled from the prospect of witnessing it, but I felt compelled. I flicked my gaze to the mirror, and he was undeniably present. A shadowy form sprinting on all fours, precisely like a wild animal. He was not merely running, but galloping, his arms and legs moving in an unnaturally perfect synchronicity, his body lurching forward with each powerful stride. His visage remained contorted in that grotesque, elongated grin, and his eyes, his damned eyes, were stark white, reflective and hollow. I felt my cognitive faculties fracture. This was not a human being. This was something entirely disparate, and it was relentlessly pursuing us. Then it emitted a laugh, just moments before the headlights abruptly extinguished, plunging everything into profound darkness. Everything became utterly black. The headlights, the dashboard, the engine, all entirely defunct. I jammed my foot onto the accelerator, but no response occurred. The truck was merely gliding in absolute blackness. Then I discerned it. That scream. It tore through the night, more deafening than before, a sound that did not belong to any terrestrial creature. Raw, piercing. I could not perceive anything. The truck continued its silent glide forward, tires whispering over the ice, devoid of power, devoid of control, and that menacing entity remained somewhere out there. I fumbled for the radio, my hands trembling uncontrollably. "Murphy, are you there?" Static then, through the pervasive white noise, his voice emerged, ragged and panicked. "It's on the roof!" A beat of terrifying silence, then, bang! Something slammed down upon the truck's roof with sufficient force to violently shake the entire cab. Cole screamed, "Another bang!" The roof buckled inward, metal groaning under the immense weight. I seized my firearm. Then the ceiling abruptly split open. A claw, excessively long, excessively thin and disturbingly human, ripped through the metal as if it were mere wet paper. I discharged the weapon. The gunshot momentarily illuminated the cab for half a second, and in that fleeting flash I perceived it. A face peering down through the gaping aperture, but it was no longer a recognizable face. The skin was splitting, stretching far too wide, the mouth grinning. Grinning, torn open like a grievous wound. It emitted a laugh. Then the truck abruptly lurched to a halt. Headlights blazed back to life. I barely registered Murphy's truck behind us, its high beams starkly illuminating the ice. The entity was gone. No blood, no corporeal remains, merely the shredded roof and indelible claw marks. For an extended moment, no one stirred. Then Murphy's voice resonated through the radio, low and fractured. "Drive. Now." And we did. We did not cease our journey, not at the checkpoint, not at the main camp, not until we were safely back within the confines of civilization, where the radiant streetlights felt akin to a sacred deliverance. I possess no knowledge of what we encountered out there, nor do I desire to. However, one certainty remains. That creature permitted our departure, and I do not believe it has concluded its interaction with us. I surmise it wished for us to perpetually recall, because late at night, when the world is hushed, when the air is excessively cold, excessively still, I solemnly swear I can still perceive it, that scream. And sometimes, when I gaze into the pervasive darkness, I believe it is gazing back. Story 2. I recall that night with vivid clarity, not solely because it was profoundly terrifying, but because it represented the closest I have ever approached to genuinely believing I was not isolated within the wilderness. Not in the conventional manner one might anticipate, not bears, nor wolves, nor even other human beings, but something altogether different, something that simply did not belong. It was my second hunting expedition ever, undertaken with my father, Rick, and his two long-standing companions, Jim and Dale. We were situated deep within the Alaskan backcountry, on a secluded island far removed from any semblance of civilization. It was the kind of remote location where, should anything go awry, one is simply irrevocably lost. No possibility of rescue, no means of summoning assistance, only the unyielding cold and the pervasive darkness. The island possessed the distinctive configuration of a massive horseshoe, with a deep cove incising its central expanse. Its shores were enveloped by dense, ancient woodlands that stretched upward into jagged, imposing mountains. It was a place of breathtaking beauty in the singular way that only Alaska can be. Wild, utterly untrammeled, and entirely indifferent to whether you endured or perished. For 2 consecutive days, we meticulously scouted the ridges, diligently tracking deer. Yet we discovered absolutely nothing. Not a single track, not a solitary fecal sample. It was as if the entire island had been meticulously purged of all animal life. Even the birds were unsettlingly silent. The sole discernible sounds were the whispering wind threading through the towering pines and the distant crashing of waves against the rugged rocks. On the evening of the 2nd day, as we sat gathered around our flickering campfire, Dale abruptly motioned for our silence, his head cocked to one side like a hound catching an elusive scent. Then in unison we all discerned it, the unmistakable vocalization of howling wolves. Our gazes instinctively turned toward the opposing side of the cove, where the tree line converged with the shoreline. Initially there was but one, a singular mournful wail that reverberated across the dark expanse of water. Then another joined, and then still another. Soon the entire forest seemed to come alive with a cacophony of howls, a chorus of eerie, discordant cries that caused the hair on the back of my neck to stand rigidly erect. Jim muttered something about the pack being on the move, but I perceived an oddity. These were not merely random calls, they were meticulously coordinated. They commenced at the very tip of the cove and slowly, deliberately moved inward, as if a net were systematically tightening. The pattern exhibited an unsettling precision, and then we saw them across the water precisely at the periphery of the tree line. A figure emerged. At first I mistook it for a deer, but then it lowered itself onto its haunches, its gaze fixed intently upon us. It was a colossal wolf, larger than any I had ever encountered. Its fur was profoundly dark, nearly black, and its eyes gleamed in the firelight like wet, polished glass. A moment later, another stepped forth, and then another. 3 wolves, all unnervingly motionless, observing us. But there was something fundamentally wrong about them. The peculiar way they moved, the unsettling way they stood, their heads tilting in eerie synchronicity. There was an unmistakable intelligence reflected in their eyes, something deeper, more calculating than mere instinct. And then the largest one, the alpha, took a deliberate step forward, its lips slowly peeling back in a measured, intentional snarl. It was at that moment I comprehended. We were not engaged in hunting tonight. We were, in fact, the hunted. The instant that creature exposed its teeth, a profound primal instinct clawed at my chest, screaming, "Run!" But I did not, nor did any of us. We remained transfixed, frozen in place, the fire crackling between us and whatever those inexplicable entities truly were. Then the alpha moved, not in the manner I had anticipated. It did not lunge or emit a guttural growl. It merely took a slow, deliberate step forward. Its massive paws sank deeply into the wet sand. Then another step, and another. It was not initiating a charge, it was meticulously stalking, and we were its designated prey. Dale was the first to react, rising with such abruptness that his chair toppled over. "That ain't normal," he muttered, his voice taut with an emotion I had never before heard from him. Profound fear. He seized his rifle, and the distinct sound of the bolt slamming forward was the solitary action that caused the wolf to hesitate. But not for long. A 4th figure slinked out from the concealment of the trees, then a 5th. The pack was systematically closing in. The flickering firelight danced across their bodies, and I perceived it. Their eyes were not merely reflecting the light, they were actively glowing. It was then that the howling commenced once more, this time closer, weaving through the trees like disembodied voices whispering in the pervasive darkness. a signal, a sinister message. Then all at once they vanished. 1 second they were tangibly present, and the next they seemed to melt into the forest like spectral entities disappearing into the profound black. I turned to my father, awaiting him to articulate something, anything that would bring coherence to what we had just witnessed. But he merely swallowed hard and gestured toward the tents. "Pack up, now." We offered no argument. We frantically tore through our encampment, haphazardly stuffing our equipment into packs with trembling hands. Every so often I caught a glimpse of movement within the trees. A fleeting shadow shifting, a momentary view of those luminous eyes peering from within the dense undergrowth. They were not retreating. They were systematically encircling us. Then we discerned it, the distinct sound of footsteps. Not the soft, padded steps characteristic of wolves. These were heavy, deliberate, excessively large, too upright. "Jesus Christ," Jim whispered, his breath clouding in the frigid air. He was staring past me, his face as pallid as death itself. I turned, and something stepped out from between the trees. It was not a wolf, nor a human being. It was something entirely distinct. I did not achieve a clear view, merely a towering, hunched silhouette with limbs disproportionately long, moving with an erratic, unnatural grace. Its respiration came in low, rasping exhalations, misting visibly in the frigid air. And then it spoke, not in coherent words nor in any language I recognized. It mimicked us. "Hello," it rasped, my own voice thrown back at me, warped and profoundly wrong. Then everything erupted into absolute chaos. The howls escalated into a frantic frenzy, and the wolves charged. The wolves advanced with startling speed, a blur of rippling muscle and predatory teeth, tearing through the undergrowth like something plucked directly from a nightmare. Dale discharged his rifle first, the sharp crack of his weapon cleaving the night, but I barely registered where the shot landed. I was already in motion, already running. "Get to the boat!" my father bellowed. I sprinted, my legs burning as my boots pounded against the damp earth. The trees blurred past me in jagged, indistinct shadows, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard the others crashing through the dense brush, heard the guttural snarls, the snapping jaws, and then the scream. A sound that was undeniably not human. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder and witnessed Jim's collapse. One of the wolves, a monstrous specimen with bristling black fur and jaws clamped onto his shoulder, dragged him off the established trail. He shrieked, thrashing desperately against its hold, his rifle lost in the dirt, blood spraying in an arc across the ferns. Dale fired again. The wolf yelped and released its grip, but Jim remained motionless. I should have turned back for him. I desperately wished to, but the entity within the trees, the thing that had mimicked my voice, was still present, observing, waiting. I felt its gaze like a sharp blade against my spine. We burst out from the tree line, the beach abruptly stretching before us in a wide, empty expanse. The boat, our singular means of egress from the island, rested just offshore, gently rocking in the dark water. We were so tantalizingly close. Then that voice emanated again from behind us, from within the trees. "Hello." But this time it was not merely mimicking, it was distinctly mocking. It was laughing. I turned my head, and for a fleeting split second I perceived it. The entity, the not wolf, the not man. Its mouth was grotesquely agape, stretched impossibly wide, as if its skin barely contained the underlying bones. Those glowing eyes burned like infernos within its skull. I ran even faster. Dale was already within the boat, frantically yanking the engine cord repeatedly. My father and I crashed into the freezing water, wading as swiftly as our panicked bodies allowed, our breath coming in ragged, desperate gulps. The howling ceased. That was worse, because silence unequivocally meant one thing. They were rapidly approaching. I hurled myself into the boat, my hands scrambling for any purchase. My father leaped in immediately after me, and the instant his feet landed on the deck, Dale finally, mercifully managed to ignite the engine. The boat lurched forward, and from the shore something screamed. Not an animal, not a person, something else, something ancient, something that should not exist. It tore through the trees, hurtling onto the beach at full velocity, and as the moonlight struck it, I comprehended the terrifying truth. It was not merely a wolf. It was not merely a man. It was both. A twisted, towering entity, half wolf, half something else. Its skin was stretched far too taut, its limbs were disproportionately elongated, and its body shuddered and shifted as if it were perpetually grappling with its own identity. And it did not cease its pursuit. It plunged into the water at full speed. It was coming directly after us. "Dale!" I screamed, pushing the throttle to its absolute limit. The boat jerked violently forward, the motor coughing as it laboriously propelled us toward the open sea. I turned, observing that entity in the water, its head breaching the surface like a nightmare made manifest. It swam with alarming speed, too fast. I seized my rifle, aimed down the sight. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I was certain I would miss. But then, as if it possessed an uncanny awareness of my intentions, it ceased. Just like that, it floated motionless in the water, observing us, and then slowly, deliberately, it sank beneath the surface, vanishing from sight. The last image I perceived before the wave entirely engulfed it was its eyes, still glowing, still burning with an unholy intensity. We successfully returned to the mainland at the break of dawn. We did not discuss what had transpired, not genuinely. We formally reported Jim as a missing person. The authorities conducted a thorough search of the island, but they never located him. Not a single track, not a solitary trace. He was simply gone. My father and I never revisited that place. Dale tragically succumbed to alcoholism a year later. Relentlessly tormented by unspeakable horrors he could never articulate. And as for me, sometimes when I close my eyes late at night, I can still perceive that chilling laugh, that mocking voice. And I ponder if out there in the pervasive darkness and the frigid waters off that desolate island, something continues its ceaseless vigil. Story 3. I have dedicated my entire existence to the wilderness. I comprehend what constitutes normalcy and what does not. And this experience was unequivocally not normal. It unfolded a few years prior during a solitary excursion deep into the Grizzly Peak Wilderness Preserve in Alaska. I had meticulously planned a protracted weekend of angling and camping, intent on retracing the very trails my father had once traversed. He had invariably extolled the untouched grandeur of the place, describing it as an environment where one could completely vanish from the burdens of the world, and that was precisely my aspiration. But occasionally, disappearing is not a voluntary choice. I arrived early, parking my utility vehicle on a secluded dirt track that meandered through a dense, frozen woodland. I was not venturing entirely off-grid, merely far enough to evade the presence of other campers. After traversing a few miles, I discovered the ideal clearing situated adjacent to a slow-moving, dark river. I could clearly discern the fish swimming just beneath the surface, their silver bodies reflecting the subdued sunlight. I proceeded to establish my modest campsite, ignite a fire, and cast my fishing line. Hours elapsed. The water remained remarkably quiet, almost too quiet, not a single bite. There was only the occasional fleeting movement beneath the surface, as if something had startled them. Then my attention shifted to the surrounding forest. I had not previously paid it much heed, but as the afternoon wore on, I began to realize the unnaturally profound silence that pervaded everything. No birdsong, no buzzing insects, no rustling leaves, only the murmur of the river and the sound of my own respiration. I endeavored to disregard it. That was when I perceived him. Positioned across the river, partially obscured by the trees, a man stood observing me. He was attired in dark garments, a tactical vest cinched across his torso. He was unequivocally not a casual hiker, nor a park ranger, and he was certainly not disoriented. He was simply waiting. I became utterly motionless, my grip instinctively tightening on my fishing rod. I stared intently at him, anticipating him to move, to undertake some action, but he remained utterly still. He simply stood there, observing. The hair on the back of my neck stood rigidly erect. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. I waved, attempting to alleviate the burgeoning tension. It was then that he moved, not away, but deeper into the trees. His movements were slow, deliberate, and he vanished into the darkness as if he had never been present at all. A cold shiver crept through my very bones. I desperately wished to believe it was inconsequential, perhaps merely another camper, someone seeking solitude just like myself. But deep within, I knew better. Something was profoundly amiss, and the most disconcerting aspect was that night was swiftly approaching. The fire crackled, casting dancing flickers of light against the surrounding trees. I sat by it, staring into the impenetrable darkness, my pulse still rhythmically hammering from the earlier encounter. The man across the river, who in the hell was he? Why was he observing me with such intensity? I admonished myself to dismiss the matter. Perhaps he truly was just another solitary individual, a hunter, someone disinclined to conversation. But deep down, an insistent feeling in my gut screamed that this was decidedly abnormal. Nevertheless, I compelled myself to consume food. I cleaned my fish, stuffed it with butter and minced garlic, and permitted the warmth of the meal to soothe my jangled nerves. I was not afraid, I repeatedly told myself, merely on edge. I kept my .45 caliber handgun within immediate reach, simply as a precautionary measure. In this remote environment, a firearm was not just a tool for protection, it offered a profound sense of psychological tranquility. The pervasive silence possessed a tangible weight. Even with the fire burning brightly, the surrounding forest felt disturbingly wrong. The typical nocturnal sounds, the chirping of insects, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, were conspicuously absent. And then came the peculiar noise, a low, resonating buzz. Initially, I attributed it to my auditory perception playing tricks on me, but then it recurred, closer this time. It was not a mosquito, nor some faint, distant engine, nor the hum of electrical power lines. No, this was something else entirely. A deep, unnatural resonance that seemed to exert pressure against my very skull, like a sound perpetually lingering just at the threshold of audibility. I rose, gripping my firearm, my eyes frantically scanning the darkness. Then, movement at the tree line just beyond the reach of my campfire's illumination. Something shifted, a silhouette, tall and humanoid, yet profoundly distorted. It stood there, completely motionless. I could not discern its face. I swallowed hard, my throat parched. "Who's there?" I called out. No response. I took a tentative step toward my tent, gun raised. Then the buzzing abruptly ceased, and in that profound silence I heard it. A voice. My voice. "Hey, you okay?" It was the precise phrase I had uttered earlier to the man across the river, but it was not emanating from me. The words originated from the impenetrable darkness, spoken back to me in the identical tone, the identical cadence, yet hollow and utterly devoid of emotion, as if something were attempting to mimic my speech. A cold, clammy perspiration slicked my back, then the light. Out of nowhere, a beam of pure, blinding white light shot down from the sky, striking the ground mere feet from my tent. It was a solid, vertical pillar of intense light, cutting through the trees like a surgical scalpel. I stumbled backward, desperately shielding my eyes, my every instinct screaming at me to flee, but my legs refused to obey. The light hovered there, utterly silent, then, just as abruptly as it had appeared, it vanished. The night consumed the clearing once more, leaving me standing there, trembling, breathless. And somewhere out in that abyssal expanse of trees and shadows, something emitted a laugh. Not human, not right. Something was toying with me, and I harbored grave doubts about my prospects of emerging from these woods alive. I do not recall explicitly pulling the trigger, but the firearm was firmly clutched in my hands. My fingers squeezed around it so tightly my knuckles ached with a burning sensation. I stood there in the profound midst of the woods, staring into the blackness beyond my campfire, my body immobilized between the primal urge to fight and an overwhelming absolute terror. That laugh, that damned laugh, it had no right to sound human, yet it did. But it wasn't. Something was lurking in those trees, something engaging in an insidious charade. The buzzing returned, vibrating intensely deep within my skull, rattling my very ribs. The ground beneath my feet hummed as if the earth itself had become infected by whatever inexplicable horror resided out there. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, advancing directly toward me. I raised my firearm, compelling myself to take a hesitant step backward, my heart violently hammering in my chest. I aimed toward the trees at whatever entity was approaching me, barely discernible in the shifting shadows beyond the firelight's reach. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. I did not care. The creature did not halt. I fired. A deafening crack rent the night. The gun recoiled sharply in my hand. Something moved, but it was not fleeing. I fired again. Boom! The light reappeared directly above me, blinding, pure white. I stumbled backward, my vision burning, feeling my own damned shadow stretch grotesquely long across the dirt. Everything within me screamed to flee, but before I could react, I heard my own voice again. "Stay back." It originated from the trees, a perfect replica, yet no, not perfect. It was distorted, subtly off, as if something were still learning the precise articulation of the words as it spoke. My stomach clenched in visceral dread. Then I perceived it. It stepped forward just past the final tree into the periphery of the light, and I felt my sanity irrevocably shatter. It bore my likeness, the identical height, the identical build, the identical attire. But its face was horrifyingly stretched. The skin was pulled far too taut over the underlying bones, as if it were never intended to conform. The mouth was grotesquely wide, the teeth disturbingly wrong. I found myself unable to breathe. It cocked its head and then it smiled. That was it. I ran. I do not even recall seizing my keys. All I know is that my legs were moving, my boots hammering against the dirt as I sprinted toward my truck like a damned animal, gasping for air, my lungs ablaze. The buzzing intensified. I could now feel it within me, in my skull, my bones, my very teeth. The trees blurred past, the light still directly above me, tracking my every movement. I reached the truck, yanked the door open, and hurled myself inside. The instant my posterior touched the seat, I turned the key. The engine roared to life. Something slammed against the truck. The entire vehicle rocked violently. I did not look. I refused to look. I engaged reverse, tires spinning, gravel spraying, then slammed it into drive and peeled out of there with frantic urgency. I drove like a deranged person, barely able to perceive the road, my headlights cutting through the dense darkness. The buzzing finally, mercifully, began to subside. By the time I reached the main thoroughfare, I could barely maintain control of the steering wheel. My body was trembling so profoundly I thought I would lose consciousness. I did not cease driving for hours, not until I was back within the town limits. Not until I perceived the comforting glow of streetlights. Not until I was far, far away from those sinister woods. I recounted my experience to no one because what in the hell was I supposed to articulate? That I had encountered something wearing my own face, that some damn nightmare had pursued me out there, mimicking my voice, copying my every move. They would undoubtedly deem me insane. Perhaps I am. But sometimes late at night, when the world is profoundly still, when the air is excessively quiet, I solemnly swear to God I can hear it. That buzzing just for a fleeting second. And I know it never truly departed from me. Story 4. There exist phenomena in the Alaskan wilderness that defy logical explanation, occurrences that cannot be accounted for, things one simply does not discuss. I acquired this knowledge through arduous experience. I once pursued a livelihood within Alaska's Polaris energy operations, necessitating extensive sojourns deep into the Arctic tundra for weeks at a time. In that remote expanse beyond the last vestiges of human civilization lay naught but a perpetually frozen wasteland, flat, utterly lifeless, stretching endlessly beneath a sky so profoundly dark and desolate it instilled the unsettling sensation of being the sole remaining inhabitant on Earth. One particular night in the depths of mid-January, my crew and I were making our return from a distant drilling site, located 60 miles to the west of Glacier Peak, Alaska. It was an exceptionally harsh winter. Temperatures plummeted far below zero. The sun had not graced the horizon in over a month, and the wind howled across the tundra like a living, tormented entity. We were navigating an ice road, a man-made pathway meticulously carved into the frozen landscape, representing our sole connective artery to the wider world. There were 6 of us distributed between 2 trucks crawling along at a mere 25 miles per hour, the maximum permissible velocity on those treacherous roads. Any greater speed and the ice beneath us risked fracturing, and should one plunge through, there was no return. We were approximately halfway across this segment, perhaps 30 miles from the nearest outpost sentinel, when our collective gaze fell upon him. A man walking in the profound middle of nowhere. Initially, I suspected my mind was playing tricks on me. Perhaps a peculiar shadow or a visual anomaly induced by the intense cold. But no. As we drew nearer, I perceived him with unequivocal clarity. He was attired in denim jeans, athletic sneakers, and a hooded sweatshirt. No gloves, no hat, no discernible outdoor gear whatsoever. Nothing that could sustain a human life in 20 degrees below zero. Yet that was not the most unsettling aspect. He exhibited no shivering. He was not hunched against the relentless wind. His clothing wasn't even coated with frost. He simply proceeded, as if the biting cold held no sway over him whatsoever. We decelerated, our headlights bathing him in their intense illumination. He evinced no reaction, not even a glance upward, merely continuing his persistent trudge forward, step by deliberate step, his countenance utterly blank. I lowered my window, and the instant the frigid external air assailed me, my breath nearly solidified in my throat. It felt akin to inhaling shattered glass. My lungs burned, my skin screamed in protest against the piercing cold. Yet this individual, he did not even flinch. "Hey," I called out, "are you okay?" Nothing. I exchanged a glance with my companion Kyle in the passenger seat. He appeared just as visibly disturbed as I felt. No one ought to be out here in such isolation. No truck, no snowmobile, no proper gear. And then I detected it. A sharp, acrid stench cutting through the freezing air like the noxious odor of decaying metal and scorched hair. It was emanating from him. I was on the verge of uttering something, of calling out again, when he abruptly turned his head. Not in a natural manner. It was excessively fast, unnaturally sharp. His neck audibly cracked, twisting almost to an impossible degree, his lifeless eyes locking directly onto mine. And then he smiled. Not a normal smile, but a wide, unnatural grin stretching across his face as if it had been crudely carved there. And I swear to God his teeth were fundamentally wrong. Kyle sucked in a sharp breath, scrambling frantically to roll up his window. "Go," he whispered, "go now." But I found myself paralyzed, because in that terrifying moment, as we sat trapped in the absolute center of a frozen wasteland with not a single soul for miles around, he commenced running. He should not have been capable of such movement, not in the profound cold, not on the treacherous ice, not in those thin sneakers that should have been frozen to his feet hours ago. But he ran at full speed directly toward the truck, and his smile never wavered. "Drive! Drive! Drive!" Kyle was screaming, violently slamming his fist against the dashboard. I floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires skidding against the ice. The rear end momentarily fishtailed, and for a terrifying second I believed we were going to overturn, but then the tires gripped and we surged ahead. I looked in the mirror. He was still advancing and he was keeping pace. My stomach twisted in knots. We were traveling at least 30 miles per hour now, and he was not falling behind. If anything, he was gaining on us. "What the hell is that?" Kyle cried out. I offered no reply. I was incapable. I was too engrossed in observing that entity, because I adamantly refused to believe it was a man, moving with an inhuman grace across the ice, his limbs jerking and twisting yet never slipping. Then he lunged. Before I could even react, his hand slammed against my window. Bam! The glass spider-webbed from the forceful impact, and I caught a horrifying glimpse of his fingers. Excessively long, disturbingly bony, their nails cracked and yellowed. I wrenched the steering wheel hard. The truck veered sharply, and then, for the very first time, he stumbled. Just for a fraction of a second, his ghastly smile faltered. I am unsure what compelled me. Perhaps it was the sheer terror clawing up my throat, but I forcefully slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, the tires shrieked, and the entity, whatever the hell it was, had no time to react. He struck the hood. I swear I heard bones shatter, but when his body slid off and impacted the ice, something was profoundly amiss. His limbs bent in an unnatural manner, and then he moved, not like a human being, but like a spider. His arms and legs snapped back into their proper positions with a sickening crunch, and then he scrambled upright, head cocked at an unnatural angle, observing us with those empty, lifeless eyes. Kyle was hyperventilating. "Go! Go!" I slammed the accelerator, caring not if we spun out, caring about nothing except escaping that hellish place. And as we tore down that ice road, the truck vibrating beneath us, I risked one final glance in the mirror. He stood there, simply standing, observing our departure. And then he performed an action that caused my blood to freeze solid. He waved, a slow, mocking gesture, as if he possessed a secret knowledge we did not, as if he were conveying, "See you soon." I did not cease driving, not once, not until we reached the outpost sentinel, a solitary metal shack standing starkly against the unending darkness. The moment I applied the brakes, Kyle leaped out, practically collapsing onto the ice as he stumbled frantically toward the cabin. I was not far behind, my legs trembling so violently I nearly succumbed. We pounded on the door, breathless and desperate. The guard on duty, an old-timer named Harris, opened it, his face a mixture of bewilderment and annoyance. "The hell's got you boys so spooked?" he grumbled. I attempted to articulate what had transpired. The man on the ice road, his ghastly smile, the unnatural way he ran like something not human. And then I recounted the most terrifying part. "We hit him," I stated, my voice barely above a whisper. "He should have died." Harris's countenance underwent a dramatic alteration. All color drained from it, and in that precise moment I knew he had encountered this narrative before. Kyle continued to pace, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "We need to contact someone, the authorities. Something is out there." Harris remained motionless. He did not reach for the radio. Instead, he simply stared at us for an extended period before finally articulating, "What did he do?" That question stopped me cold. Not who was he, not where did you see him, but what did he do? I swallowed hard, my mouth as dry as desert sand. He ran at us. He kept pace with the truck, and then when we hit him, he got back up, like it was nothing. Harris sighed, a long, weary exhalation. Then he retrieved a thermos from his desk, unscrewed its lid, and took a slow sip of something that unmistakably smelled of neat whiskey. "You ain't the first to see him," he muttered. My stomach plummeted. Kyle and I exchanged a shared glance, the oppressive weight of those words pressing down upon us like a heavy shroud. "What do you mean?" I inquired. Harris set the thermos down and leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We receive reports every couple of years. Same description. Man on the ice road, jeans, sneakers, no gear, smiling like he knows some sick joke you don't." He exhaled through his nose. "Sometimes he chases, sometimes he just watches, but one thing's always the same." I moistened my lips, my mouth parched. "What?" Harris's eyes locked onto mine. "You always see him again." Silence descended. Kyle vehemently shook his head. No, we're flying out tomorrow. We're leaving Alaska. We're never coming back here." Harris offered no argument, merely a small, grim nod. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's what the others said too." Kyle and I departed the following morning. We spoke very little, simply gathered our belongings and boarded the first southbound flight. I endeavored to convince myself it was over, that he was merely some deranged individual lost in the tundra, that Harris was speaking nonsense. I tried to forget. For a period I nearly succeeded, until last night, until I was returning home late, stepping out of my truck when I perceived it. That faint prickle on the back of my neck, that unsettling sensation one experiences when being observed. Slowly I turned toward the extremity of my driveway, and there, standing just beneath the streetlight, was a man. Jeans, sneakers, a hooded garment. His face was obscured by shadow, but I knew. I knew because even from 20 feet away I could still discern him smiling. Story 5. There are entities in the wild that will take your life without a moment's hesitation. Bears, wolves, the brutal cold itself. But there exist far more malevolent things. Entities that do not merely kill you, but relentlessly hunt you. I was deep within the Alaskan wilderness alongside my father, Mark, and his two long-standing hunting companions, Doug and Ray. We were embarked on a week-long expedition, diligently tracking deer in one of the state's most secluded regions, a place where cellular connectivity was non-existent, and the sole means of egress was by watercraft. The landscape was truly awe-inspiring, colossal mountains gracefully curving around a horseshoe-shaped cove, with dense forest pressing in from every direction. It was breathtakingly beautiful, untouched, and yet it felt profoundly wrong, as if our very presence there was an intrusion. For 2 days, we meticulously searched for any indication of deer, but found absolutely nothing. No tracks, no droppings, no discernible movement. It was as if the entire island had been meticulously drained of all life. And then, that particular night, we discovered the chilling reason why. It commenced with the howls. Initially it was distant, merely one protracted and sorrowful sound cutting through the still night air. But swiftly others joined in, the eerie chorus echoing throughout the valley. "Wolves," my father muttered, tossing another log onto the fire. Doug frowned. "That many?" I was not an expert, but even I sensed that something was amiss. Wolves do not vocalize in such a manner, not in perfect synchronization, not in a discernible pattern, not as if they were systematically closing in. We seized our rifles, attentively listening as the howling crept nearer. Then, out of the pervasive darkness, I perceived movement across the cove. Initially, I mistook it for a trick of the firelight, then I comprehended. They were observing us. 6 of them, perhaps more. Their eyes glowed eerily in the flickering firelight, reflecting back an unnatural yellow hue. And then, as if responding to some silent command, they collectively sat down, all at once. They simply remained there, staring intently at us. Doug let out a nervous, strained chuckle. "That's not normal." My father offered no reply because something else was stirring within the trees, something significantly larger. The wolves remained motionless, their glowing eyes fixed rigidly upon us. They were not snarling, they were not pacing, they were waiting. But for what purpose? Then I discerned it. A branch snapping deep within the forest behind us. Not a minor crack, like that produced by a raccoon or a fox. This was something substantial, heavy, moving with deliberate intent. The sound of branches breaking, not underfoot, but as if they were being violently ripped apart. And then the smell assailed us. Rotting meat, thick and oily. It clung oppressively to the cold air, causing my stomach to churn violently. I gripped my rifle more tightly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The wolves evinced no reaction, neither to the sound nor to the stench, because they were not the immediate threat. They were merely observing, as if awaiting our next move. Ray took a cautious step toward the tree line, his rifle raised. "If it's a bear, we need to..." The woods erupted. Something immense crashed through the undergrowth, moving with such blinding speed I barely caught a glimpse. I only heard the devastating impact, Ray screaming as he was violently yanked backward, his body vanishing into the trees. His scream abruptly ceased, as if something had clamped a hand over his mouth, or something far more sinister. "Ray!" Doug fired blindly into the darkness, the gunshots echoing throughout the valley. My father seized my arm and forcibly pulled me toward the boat. "Move!" he bellowed, but I found myself unable to move, because as I turned, my eyes flicked back to the wolves and they were grinning. I swear to God, the wolves were laughing, their lips curled back, teeth glinting in the firelight, their chests rising and falling in a manner that almost resembled silent amusement, as if they possessed knowledge we lacked, as if this entire ordeal were merely a twisted game. Then from the darkness, Ray commenced screaming again. But it was profoundly wrong. It was warped, the pitch excessively high, the words unnaturally drawn out as if his voice were being stretched, his cries bubbling into a choked gurgle. I turned toward the trees, and for a fleeting split second I perceived it. Something immense, towering, skeletal beneath sagging black fur. Its arms were disproportionately long, its fingers too slender, tipped with jagged claws. And its face. Oh God, its face. It was not a wolf, it was not a man, it was both. Ray's body hung limply in one of its twisted arms, his head lolling at an impossible angle. His mouth still moved as if he were futilely attempting to scream, but the sound was no longer emanating from him. It was originating from the creature that held him. It mimicked him, repeating his dying screams in a voice that was undeniably not human. I ran. I do not recall making the conscious decision. I do not even remember seizing my rifle. 1 second I was staring in paralyzing horror at that entity, and the next I was sprinting frantically toward the boat, my father and Doug directly behind me. The wolves never moved, neither to pursue us nor to attack, merely to observe. I did not cease my flight until I reached the water. I did not even think. I simply hurled myself into the boat, my father right behind me, Doug barely managing to clamber in before the engine roared to life. As we pulled away from the shore, I cast one final glance backward. Ray's body lay crumpled on the beach, his limbs grotesquely twisted, his face frozen in an open-mouthed scream. And standing over him, bathed in the eerie firelight, was the creature from the trees. It did not pursue us, it did not move. It merely stood there, and then it lifted a hand and waved. We never returned. The authorities conducted a search of the island for Ray's remains, but they never located him. They attributed his disappearance to wolves, citing it as an accident, suggesting perhaps he had fallen and his body had been dragged away. But I comprehend the truth. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls mournfully through the trees, I can still perceive his scream. And I know it was not the wolves, it was something else, something that still carries my memory.
Bye.